Well, hello, everyone. My name is Connie Smith, and I am the Senior Director of Legal Services for TCDI. And we are very happy to be here with all of you joining us and to partner with the South Florida Association of Corporate Counsel to host today's program on cell phone forensics and social media as they relate to litigation and discovery. Not a topic covered in law school for most of us, so we are here to educate you all on how to handle these technological and legal challenges as they have become very common. A few housekeeping items before we get started and before we look at the agenda. One, CLE credit. This webinar has been approved by the Florida Bar for 1 hour of technology credit. And since the Florida Bar is a self-reporting state, we'll provide that course number to you at the conclusion of the program. For anyone joining us for out of state, we can provide the Florida CLE certificate, and you're welcome to use that with your state bar to seek CLE credit. Second, we are going to have a question forum, and there's a chat bar available, and we would love throughout the program for you to submit any questions to our panel of experts. We've received a few already, and we're going to be answering those at the end of the program. We've got some time reserved at the end, so if anything comes to mind as the program proceeds today, just send over a question and we'll try to get that answered for you. You're also welcome to reach out to me directly. I'm here to help you if any questions pop up down the road. And finally, feedback. We appreciate feedback, and education is important to us and making sure that the legal community is educated. We value that at TCDI, and I know the South Florida Association of Corporate Counsel does as well. We'd love to hear what you think about today's program, and we're always interested in learning about topics of interest for future programs. My contact information will be provided at the very end, and Christina is always very responsive on behalf of the ACC. Okay, let's take a look at today's agenda. We're going to introduce you, or I'll introduce you to the panelists, and then we're going to have a high-level Forensics 101. We'll then move into cell phone collections, social media discovery. We'll talk about remote collections and how things have really evolved in particular over the last year and a half. And then the admissibility of ESI, electronically stored information. And then, as I've mentioned earlier, we'll open it up for questions and answers. So before I introduce you to our panelists, I want to tell you just a little bit about TCDI. We were established in 1988 to service a few select clients that managed complex database applications for the United States government. Over the past 30 years, we really have been a pioneer in the legal technology market. We specialize in case management, e-discovery, managed document review, cybersecurity, and forensics, which is what we're going to talk about today primarily. Over the years, we really have built some incredible technology and cultivated a team of experts to support our clients in law firms and in corporations, both very large and very small. And today, our panelists, they've been in the e-discovery and forensics trenches for a very long time, and they've been involved in some of the most high-profile cases around the country, and then they've been involved in just a run-of-the-mill contract dispute. So they've practically seen it all, and they're going to share some of that with you today. As Tim mentioned, I'm here in South Florida. We have major offices in Greensboro, North Carolina, and Cleveland, Ohio, and operate throughout the United States. And I'm real excited to introduce these folks to you today so you can learn a few things and utilize us as a resource to answer your questions as they come up either today or down the road. First, we've got Tim Otsitnik, our Executive Vice President General Counsel. And Tim is outside of our Cleveland office, and he really has been at the forefront of practitioners addressing issues involving the security and discovery of electronically stored information, or ESI. And throughout his career, Tim has really conducted so many seminars regarding forensics, cybersecurity, data privacy, e-discovery, and many other technology issues. So I'm happy to have him here with us today. Next, we've got Michael Canub, and as Tim mentioned, he's out of our Greensboro headquarters. And Mike came to us after a decade in law enforcement, and he was a detective who did a lot of digital forensics investigations, very interesting things. So he's quite experienced and is a digital forensics and cybersecurity analyst. His expertise really spans a wide variety of forensic data and investigative techniques. And finally, we've got Brad Bogar, and he's in our Cleveland office. And he's got well over 7 years of digital forensics experience. He's an analyst for us as well. And while he's got experience with everything, he's especially knowledgeable in employee investigations and data exfiltrations. In leading our specific discussions on cell phone data and social media, we felt like it would be a really good idea to give you all just a high-level overview of digital forensics. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and Tim to discuss this a little bit. Mike, do you want to start us off and just telling us a little bit about digital forensics?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. So digital forensics encompasses a scientific and a lot of times a very specific methodology for gathering electronic data. We utilize different ways to make sure, in our tools, to make sure that the data that we collect is not only preserved correctly or recovered correctly, but that we can authenticate the data that we do collect, and that at the end of the day, we can analyze that data and do it in a repetitive process. We can always repeat that process that we do. So that is the goal of digital forensics. Now, there are some different types of devices that we could talk about. In terms of common digital devices, we're going to look at cell phones. That's going to be the topic for today. But we oftentimes are also dealing with email, maybe some cloud data. Also could look at network storage that we can access via the client networks. But data can come in all sorts of different shapes and forms, and every year it seems like there's new devices on the market and new things that are capturing data. And so we're always trying to keep up and catch up with the latest and greatest toys that we get for ourselves. And of course, they always come into play into these litigations.
Yeah, I would only add to that you know, if the device has some sort of form of magnetic media, then digital forensics can be applied to it. We've done things like medical instruments, HVAC equipment, things that you wouldn't typically think about. And you know, Michael, there must be some common things that you're typically asked to recover. You know, a little more often than others. What do people seek in litigation today that you're our favorites?
So the big ones are text messaging or communications. That could be from a mobile device like cell phones, laptops, email is a big one, and any kind of intercommunication like Slack or those type of programs that corporations often use to communicate between employees.
So
on the, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure which one of you are going to cover the slide on EDRM, but you know, EDRM's been around for about 15 years. It was an effort to put together a sort of a workflow of where electronically stored information occurs in a corporate setting, and you know, maybe you can talk a little bit about where the forensics sits on that EDRM reference model. Most recently, information governance has been added to the left of the model, but maybe you can talk a little bit about where forensics fits.
So as soon as you realize that you have some type of data that needs to be preserved, that's immediately when you should start thinking about, do I need to preserve it with a digital forensics professional? You know, you don't want to have that data stepped on in any kind of way. So a lot of times it's good to call in someone who is an expert in those methods and technologies so that they can actually gather that data for you right away. Because once you secure the data and you have preserved it, you can go from there and start analyzing. You can always come back to that. You always have a starting place to go to. So that is a great way to get started. The big thing is you don't want perhaps somebody to accidentally alter the metadata on the data that you're trying to collect. It may or may not be important, But that's why you call right ahead to somebody who can help you out with that, and you get moving on. You can always come back later as you learn more information about whatever litigation that you're working on, and you can always come back and examine or analyze the data that you collected, but maybe it points you in another direction to somewhere else that you need to go collect more data from. And so it can kind of be a circular set of steps that you do where you preserve, you review, you analyze, maybe you think there's something else and we'll go back and preserve some more.
Tim, I think this is where your experience over the years is really important. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the different types of cases where digital forensics can be of very helpful and very critical to a case.
So when I think about digital forensics, I think of it in two ways. One is just generally using digital forensics as a tool in which to collect data in litigation. In the old days, we collect boxes, we look through boxes, and now we've evolved, and instead we collect things like cell phones and social media, which we're going to talk about today. But we also collect emails and network shares and things like that. And we go through and we review that data and produce in litigation. And forensics is a tool that's used for that collection process. But the second sort of column in which forensics is used is when forensics is typically used to evaluate computers, because computers are being used as an instrumentality of whatever the civil offense or crime was. And so the best example for us and what we seem to get the most of are cases involving theft of intellectual property and investigations of corporate misconduct and foreign corrupt practice investigations, but all sorts of investigations where the computers themselves or the mobile devices were more of an instrumentality of what the civil offense or the crime was. And that's separate from the run-of-the-mill sort of collect it, gather it, review it, and produce it. But you can see here all the different types of cases involved. So Michael, I think you're going to talk a little bit about this again.
Sure. So the big deal here is that I try to use previous law enforcement examples as something that you wouldn't want to do, right? So if you go to a crime scene and you're interested in gathering up fingerprints that may be there, as a responding officer, you don't want to go busted through the door and touching everything with your hands that aren't gloved. You'd ruin the evidence, right? Or you would alter it in some way. Well, that's the thing that we try to urge people not to do, is to take a peek at the evidence or look at it or to touch it. IT departments of corporations are often there to help and to help us gather the data, but sometimes they can't help themselves. And in that process, you can alter some of the metadata. Maybe it's important, maybe it's not. It's hard to say because every investigation is a little different. But the things that a forensics team will need are things like account credentials, passcodes, any kind of information that you can give us about the devices and what data that you expect to find on those devices. Those are all things that you want to communicate with your partner. And what the forensics team is going to help do is take all the different ways that you can gather data, or all the different devices, or all the different confusing ways that we have to interface with these devices to even get the data. And we're going to be able to provide you that expertise to be able to say, hey, yeah, we understand what you have. We understand the device that you have. We've gathered information like this before, but maybe this is the best way to go about getting it. Or maybe you have data somewhere like on a cell phone, but nowadays that's not the only location that you might find some of the data that you're interested in. So having somebody that would know where to go and to help you, get through the process of finding the data, collecting it, preserving it, and then analyzing it later on is super important. But your forensics partner will definitely absolutely help you through all that scoping information or any kind of documentation that is needed. Chain of custody is super important. We don't want to go grab stuff without saying when we were there, what we grabbed, how do we do it, what's the methodology that we used. All that stuff can become super important later on down the road if the litigation gets that far down the road.
That's a good point, Michael. And we never want our clients to be in a position where things are questioned, how data was handled. And there's a tried and true methodologies for handling that. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. So that just gives us a little bit of an overview on forensics. What we want to get into now are cell phones. And I don't know anyone that doesn't have a cell phone. We're all operating off them from a personal standpoint, from a business standpoint. So I am getting calls regularly. Our whole team gets calls regularly on cell phones, collections. How do we get it? What can we get off of these devices? So I think Mike and Brad are going to talk with us a little bit about this. And maybe Michael, you can tell us a little bit about collections and just kind of kick off this discussion for us. And folks, please do send in questions as we go through this and we're happy to talk about specific instances and things of that nature. So send those on over and we'll get to them at the end.
Yeah, here's the meat and potatoes. So it all comes down to, it depends. There are so many types of devices when it comes to the cell phone market. I mean,
you don't know how much lawyers hate to hear that, Michael, but go ahead. Because I know it's true.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. 10, 12 years ago, it was much simpler. But look what these devices can do nowadays. They keep track of our fitness. They keep track of our emails. They keep track of our communications. I mean, they're not just for, phone calls. But we get into where we can generalize a few things about the cell phone collections. And from our perspective, we can kind of break it down into a couple paths that we're going to take. And the key considerations that we're going to ask you for are going to be things like, what type of phone is it? Do you know the make and model of it? Can you ask the custodian what it is? There's different methodologies for Android. There's different methodologies for Apple products. If anybody still has a BlackBerry, there would be a different methodology for that too. Even the little flip phones, they have completely different operating systems than the main two, which are Apple and Android. Now, the things that could help us out, in determining how we're going to do the collections and the methodology that we're going to use, is going to be related to what kind of data are you looking for. So things that help us out for scoping, are we just looking for text messages? Are we looking for any kind of pictures that maybe an employee trying to steal data would take? Is there email? Did they pass stuff over a cloud share or something like that? Those are all things that we would like to know on the front end, so we know where to go and how to apply our techniques and our tools appropriately. But the typical things that we're asked for is, contact information, text messaging, communications. It's not just text messages, not just iMessages. There's chat applications like WhatsApp or Threema or Signal, stuff like that. Those are all things that we want to take a look at. And even social media is huge. Brad, do you want to tell them a little bit about all the different types of social media that we can find on these phones?
Sure. We'll find traces of certainly their Facebook activity, Facebook Messenger. We can certainly get cross messaging with Instagram messaging that what we'd find on phones. Telegram is another one that technically they consider a social media app. You can really only get that from phones. It's not really intended to be a desktop application. But you can get things that are kind of fringe, maybe like I don't know how valuable it would be, but certainly we can get instant information from things like Reddit, the different websites they visited that have a social media aspect. But the big ones we usually get from phones are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and some artifacts we'll find there. And if we have permission, we can dive deeper to try to get those credentials and get a full collection of those with different tools, but we'll get indications of activity from the phones.
Yeah, what do you think about some of the other artifacts that we're not typically asked for? This may be getting a little ahead of ourselves, but as cell phone collections, there is typically data that we're never really asked for, but it's still there.
Yeah, we get asked quite often for just text messages or the call log or the contacts, pretty basic information off the phone. But certainly in dealing with IP theft and investigations, you can get some rich data even from voicemail messages. You might find out that that employee was communicating and trying to set up their interview and getting communications back from their recruiter at their new employer, and then passing information on, like, or promising things that may be certainly out of line with their non-compete, or just blatant data exfiltration and IP theft. So don't miss out. I mean, there's certainly areas of the phone that are, I mean, even typical areas of the phone that you would associate with just a regular phone use that can be rich sources for your cases.
Okay, this is one we get all the time. Deleted data. Can we get our hands on that deleted data? Mike, how are we handling this? I know this is the $1 million question right here.
The same way I answered the earlier question. It depends.
Which no one's going to like.
No, not at all. Well, so just like any good investigation, you're going to want to get details, and the details really do matter when it comes to what kind of data we're going to try to acquire. Now, specifically about deleted data, computers, laptops, desktops, that stuff can be recoverable, and it can be recoverable relatively easy in some instances. With cell phones, it's a bit of a different story. It's harder. The more security that they lay on year after year, it is interfering with the ability to actually pull some of this data. Now, that's not to say that you can't find deleted data. Given the right circumstances, we absolutely could find it. If you have an old iPhone, and I mean, generation 4, and that's got data on it from way back then, and it's important and relevant to your investigation, we have tools that can actually pull a full dump of the phone, and we can really dig deep with our forensics tools and pull some of that recovered data. Now, if it's something that was, a recent phone, that's a really new phone, these are times when we're going to say, well, how long ago was this thing deleted? I hear that a lot. Client calls up, they say, hey, can you get this deleted text message? The custodian has told us that they just deleted it. I say, well, when did they delete it? That's an important detail. And they say, let me find out. We get to call back later and say, they deleted it 2 years ago. You say, chances are not good that we're going to get that data. But we could try, and that's the big thing. The experience that Brad and I can bring with the many different years, we've seen the evolution of a lot of these devices. And so, it doesn't hurt to ever get on a phone call and discuss these important little details that would give us the kind of clues to know whether or not it's something that we can realistically get or not. But overall, this slide shows you a couple things that are important here. Obviously, the device and operating system come into play. The type of data, what application did it come from? Did it come from, Facebook Messenger? Is it in some sort of communication application that stores all this data in a database and never cleans it out? I mean, that's a possibility too. The funny thing with deleted stuff is sometimes when we delete things, you think you got rid of it, but maybe it is actually somewhere else. Example I'll use would be, hey, I have an iPhone, client has an iPhone, or the custodian has an iPhone. They say, yeah, they deleted it 2 years ago, and then they had an iPhone 5 or whatever, 8, doesn't really matter at this point, but it's old one, right? But last year they upgraded. And you say, well, where's that old phone? That's a good question. Let's go find it. Turns out the person still has it. You can go back and look at that data on there. Of course, as long as they can remember the passcode to get into it and whatnot. But perhaps they synced that device and made backups. Backups on people's computers happens all the time, and it's something that people can just gloss right over and forget. So those are the types of things that you want to look for and ask questions about, because perhaps it's relevant, perhaps it's not. It's hard to say without getting into those details for your specific litigation or project.
Yeah, one follow-up comment on that regarding the evolution of these applications. As most know, data privacy issues are in the forefront of how we're proceeding these days. And what I would say is that it's going to become harder and harder and harder to recover forms of data and deleted data moving forward, because the applications themselves are doing a better and better job of making them go away, because they're doing it. They want to do it. They want to make it go away for data privacy concerns, and so that's going to continue. And a few years from now, it's going to be even that much harder.
Well, let's put it into action. Brad, have you got a little real life example for us you can talk about as far as cell phones go? No, we touched on it earlier.
Yeah, we did kind of briefly touch on it, and it kind of leads back to what Mike just mentioned. In a previous case, we were engaged. I was engaged to look at IP theft from an employee exit from a company to move on to a competitor, and then to find out if they stole any data attached to the USB device. It's kind of a typical IP theft investigation. But as part of that analysis, I found a iPhone backup on that laptop we had imaged, and in that iPhone backup were voicemails and text messages with their HR recruiter. And the voicemails were really the key point, because they could tell them from the voicemails that a recruiter was leaving that they were planning to leave much sooner than they had told their manager, and perhaps maybe promising more than they should, stealing like the customers and client data and promising to bring that over. And so that was a really rich source. It was unexpected to find on the laptop. So we weren't engaged to gather that custodian's phone. We were just lucky to find an unencrypted iPhone backup that we could dig through, and that was really helpful, really helpful. And then, of course, we had a good result.
Thanks for sharing that. Go ahead, Michael. Sorry.
I was going to say, I thought of something I didn't quite cover there. So when it comes to deleted stuff and trying to find things where they may exist, they may not exist, there's always a chance of stumbling across something that you're looking for, and Brad just covered that. It's an excellent way to take your investigation and move it further.
Very, very true. Very true. Okay, well, I think that gives us a lot of good information as far as cell phones go. Again, if you have questions, you'll have specific questions, send them in. And we're going to move on to social media. Very hot topic. Just like the phones, folks are living on social media. Companies are living on social media. And not a day goes by that we don't get an inquiry on assisting on collecting social media, whether it's from an individual, like I said, for a company, accounts that you have access to, accounts that you do not have access to. Some of this information that's been put out there can be very helpful in a case. It can be very harmful to your case. So it's really just a big can of worms right now. And we've collected thousands of social media accounts. So we've got a lot of experience in it. And if we can go to the next slide, we'll just jump right into this with Brad on the forensics of social media collections.
Sure. There's a number of different ways to collect social media, and there's numbers of different sources out there. I've already mentioned Facebook and Messenger, the Messenger app for Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, but there's tons of places, ways to get social media. But there's generally two major ways we'll find that information. And the richest source is certainly where we're provided the credentials of the custodian's account, so we can do a full pull, or as much as that social media app will allow us to pull through our forensic applications to get the richest data set from that that source, be it Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. When we don't have that, we're certainly not going to quote unquote hack an account. That would not be ethical and certainly not illegal. What we'll tend to do is if we'll get what we can that's public information on that account, and we'll call that a non-credentialed way to get in there. We'll use a lab account that's on that same platform to log in as that account, and then try to see what we can gather from that other social media presence on the same platform that is public. But there's key factors there in that they may not have any data set on their account to be public. They might have their entire Facebook profile, their entire Twitter profile set to private, and that only to share information with quote unquote their followers or their friends on that application. So we may get very little there. So it's always best to have those credentials, and which leads into kind of the type of data what we'll get from that. We can certainly get a lot of direct messaging, depending on the application we'll get. A lot of them will use instant messages back and forth between different members of that same platform. We can get the timeline, group activity. We can do just the regular archive that these platforms have, and that'll come out in some weird formats, but we can certainly address those to review that down the line. But typically, we'll use our forensic tools to try to grab that so we can get the best result when we export out that data in different formats. And that can certainly depend on the source of the social media we're gathering. That'll depend on the output we're going to get. We might get Facebook and get the full timeline, say in an HTML format or a PDF format or a load file, depending on what is needed on that. But we can probably move on from this screen here, which leads us to definitely the problems, which I've kind of alluded to a little bit here. When people log into these accounts, and you certainly probably had this problem trying to add those social media to your accounts to a new phone or a new device, you might have to use what's called multi-factor authentication just to log into your own account. And certainly we'll get that when we try to log into those same accounts with the custodian's credentials. It'll send a code to either a phone with a text message or a code to an email account to verify that the person logging in as them is actually authorized to do so. We'll need to work with the custodian to make that work out, or with someone who is in direct contact with the custodian so we can get those codes, get logged in, and then start collecting that account. And that's certainly a factor we're going to run into with credentialed access to those accounts. That data that we would collect is just going to be a snapshot in time from the time we get that login to as far back as that platform will allow. Like Twitter will only allow you to go back and grab maybe 2,500, 3,000 tweets on that account. That's not till the beginning of time. It just says how far back that platform will allow you to. And there are limits, to certain platforms as to how much they'll allow even the owner of the account to gather from that account. And those platforms are not static. They'll change from year to year and even from month to month as they run updates and they change the look and feel of those accounts. We recently ran into an issue with Facebook changing a substantial part of the code, and here you might be hearing static in your head, just the way that platform runs. And that certainly affected our tools as to what we were able to gather from that account and the way it was presented when it was down the road for review. From the user's end, the custodians, and that, okay, the platform looks a little different, the colors have changed, it looks prettier, but from our end, that's a real headache to try to gather that stuff and try to parse each of those individual posts out into a platform that's suitable for review. And that can certainly address, that can certainly bring up issues with production concerns, presentations at trial. How that looks is a little bit different rather than just getting each individual post, or instead of just a string of posts as one big string to be able to parse out and search down the road. Now, a lot of these sites, particularly Facebook, has purchased Instagram, so you'll get cross-platform direct messages. So you can get one login that'll work with both accounts, and you'd be able to log into different platforms with that Facebook login. So they'll use that as your to set up your account and to be able to log in with that same credential. And that can present those same problems with authentication, getting those codes to those phones, those emails to get the same account, even though you're logging into a different platform. And I've kind of brushed over this with earlier, but we would want either the credentials on the account or to log in to get the public information. We wouldn't want to try to hack an account, and we would certainly want to protect the custodian's information throughout the entire process. Quite often we'll ask them to change their password to a temporary password throughout the entire process, and then change it to wherever they'd like after that. That way we don't have a password that might be part of their regular keychain they use on other accounts. We could probably move on from here.
Yeah, no, before we move on, a couple things that I want to point out here. You know, first and foremost is there are certainly ethical considerations regarding sort of self-help going out there and trying to recover this data on your own. You know, from a lawyer's standpoint, it would violate the ethical rules in most every state, and some are even more stringent than you can imagine. And so when trying to go out there and collect this data on your own and look at some information that may be available on the website, it's a good idea to understand the application of the ethical rules to what you're trying to do. And another thing that I want to talk about, this is particularly difficult from a challenge standpoint, and that is that, look, new forms of social media are occurring constantly. My kids are always asking me, well, Dad, aren't you on so-and-so? Well, no, I'm not, and I'm not going to be. They're just, I can't keep up with them. I'm sorry. I just can't. And not only can I not keep up with them, but the tools that Michael and Brad are using can't keep up with them. They can't keep up with the new forms of social media. They can't keep up with the firmware releases that each of these tools, applications put out. So as a result, we seem to constantly be in a stage of requiring evolution. Well, I'm sorry, we can't get that. Let's wait until the next release of the tool we use comes out, and maybe we'll be able to get that. So, you know, there are lots of challenges because of the dynamic nature of new social media and even the existing social media, the application updates and the firmware updates. We all know we have iPhones. We see that they get updated every day. We look, there's 10 applications getting updated. You know, our forensic tools are playing a catch-up game to that. I'm sorry, and let's now go on to the next slide.
That's okay, Tim. Those are very good points and very helpful. This is great. The timing on this is really great on the question that just came in a few minutes ago about remote collections. And so that's our next topic, a question about collecting a cell phone remotely and how long that can take. So we're going to move into that now and hopefully touch on some of those questions that have come in about remote collections. Things have really changed. They were in the process of changing before COVID, but certainly COVID has made a big impact on how we conduct ourselves as far as collections go. So Mike, do you want to jump in on that and talk to us about remote versus what we once called traditional collections?
Absolutely. Tim made a really good point. We are always in a cat and mouse game with this technology. And so, you know, experience comes to play big times. Your experience is what allows you to think outside of the box and to, you know, overcome challenges that absolutely show up from day to day and case to case. That being said, I mean, we all know how this last year went. All of a sudden we're in lockdown, got to go home, can't go out to do things. Hey, the traditional way of collecting this stuff was either going on site or having it shipped to the lab. Now, the benefit to going on site is you have an expert there right there that can handle working with whatever piece of evidence that they're working with. And they may not have all their tools. That's kind of the downside. You send it to a lab, that's a great thing too. We have all of our tools. We got time to work on it, and we can usually get that stuff turned around relatively quickly because we have everything we need. right then and there. Now, what's the downside of that? The custodian's out of their device for a little bit. And we were already seeing that, people were asking about remote collections. Was there a way to make it more convenient for the custodian? Because as we all know, we can't be separated from our devices, and we all love our mobile devices. So the big thing here is, what's the challenge? The challenge is getting to that data in a way that is forensically sound, that we can go back and talk about the repeatable, reproducible, defensible type stuff that we do. So the good thing is there are ways to handle this. And so for us, it's shipping out a remote collection kit. Now, I call it a kit, but it could be a couple different things. It could be an actual hard drive that's got our tools on it, or some specialized tools for us to use, or it could be a whole computer that we ship out to somebody because they don't have all the equipment needed to do on the remote collection. Either way, we got it covered. But the big thing here is that the idea is that we're going to use our expertise, but do it remotely. And the way you can do that is do a remote session with the custodian. We need their help to obviously get the connection started. But once it's started, we're going to use something like TeamViewer or another remote application to take control of their computer and go from there like we were there at their site, which has been great. It's allowed us to do things with cell phones, which years ago we probably would have never thought would have been possible. We can get collections from these cell phones. Apple's pretty easy. Android's a little sticky because there's just so many different models and variations of that system. But the good news is that it works for us. We can collect the data. We can get what our clients are looking for. We have all that information shipped back. It's all encrypted. It's safe within transit. Don't have to worry about any of that kind of mess. It comes here to our locations at our labs. We got one in Cleveland. We got one in Greensboro. And both places have secure evidence storage that holds all this information. And from there, we can get started with our tools and do the analysis portion and keep moving. So, Connie, did that answer any of the questions that came through?
It touched on a couple. One that's a really great question is it possible to collect only text messages from a cell phone rather than imaging the entire device?
That's another, it depends.
Okay.
But there are times when you could possibly use some methodologies to collect just the logical information. I don't want to say it's a bad thing, because it's not. It's just a very specific way of gathering that data, and it may or may not be a help to that case. And what we find is that lots of times when we start a project with a client, there's the knowledge that we have on the front end, and then there's the knowledge that we gain as the people are interviewed or the details start coming out. And what we find is that we are often wanting to go back to the well to go look and grab more information. If we do a very, very specific, targeted collection, which is possible in some circumstances, then you may be missing a bunch of other stuff that you're going to want later on. And what that ends up being is extra cost and effort that the client ends up having to pay for if they would have gone with a traditional approach, which is let us get a good, solid collection from a phone, and then we'll have a place that we can keep coming back to if, as the details lead us in that, or the investigation leads us in that direction, that we can go back to. What people and
no, I was just going to say, ESI has always been an iterative process, and I always try to counsel clients against just taking part of the data, because inevitably I'm going to double the cost because I'm going to have to go back again. It just happens so many times that it's simply just not worth it to go in and take a look at just the text messages. You later find out from the custodian, oh no, I didn't use iPhone text. I had an app that I used for text messages. Well, we didn't take
that.
So and those are real examples that happen. So I think it's an iterative process, and I think you take the image.
I would
I
always
think
agree
that's
with that.
helpful. Yes, it is a best practice. The number of times I've seen folks try to do that, and then they have to go back and get the entire thing. Okay, looking at our time, Tim, do you want to highlight some things about admissibility, because that is very important to this? We've talked about different things to collect and how to collect it, and we really need to address, at least briefly, what we can do with it as when we have it.
Okay, why don't we advance to the next slide, and we'll talk a little bit about admissibility. I can do it in 5 to 7 minutes or less, and then we can go back and address some of these questions, which I think will cover some of the things that were considerations in the just prior slides. But you all have the slides, and they'll be sent to you afterwards. But look, you've heard both Michael and Brad say this over and over again. Evidence analysis must be reproducible, repeatable, defensible, and so that's what we try to achieve. There are exceptions to that in terms of best practices. Frankly, there's nothing as good as original, but original isn't always possible. And so just like the rules of evidence allow for copies, there are changes and things we have to think ahead. And I can give real world examples of people who they didn't have a text message from a forensics person, but they in fact took a picture of their phone with that text message on it. And how you get that authenticated is just like the old way. The person says, well, look, they sent me a message, I saw the message, I took a picture, and here's the picture. And you authenticate it that way instead of another way. So there are lots of ways of doing things. But important considerations from an admissibility standpoint are maintaining chains of custody. Look, we need to be able to show that there is no chance that somebody did something untoward to modify or change this data. And we typically do that by creating forensic images, using mathematical hashing techniques, almost like a digital fingerprint, to ensure that the document itself or the image itself is identical to the form in which we originally found it. Why don't we go to the next slide? And so what I'm really going to try to do is, did we get rid of the slide of the resources, the one that was before this, or did it, maybe there's a resource slide?
They're going to have it in their packet. It's interactive, and we were having some trouble with that one, but they'll have it in their packet.
All right. So in your packet is a list of all sorts of law review articles, other commentaries that I find helpful on admissibility of ESI, and I commend them to you if you're dealing with these issues in court. How do we do it? This is less on admissibility, the Jumpstart outline, and more on helping you talk to your clients, whether they're corporate clients or individual clients, about the types of data they may have. Jumpstart outline goes through all the different forms of media and takes you on a journey that you can have with your client to investigate the sorts of things that may be relevant to the claims and defenses in litigation and be producible. So the Jumpstart outline is one such document. Let's go to the next one. This next one is a biggie. This is very recent. This is also from the Sedona conference. This is the commentary on ESI evidence and admissibility. It's primarily written by Kevin Brady and led that effort, but Judge Paul Grimm, who you'll see in some of the later documents, was also very involved. Judge Paul Grimm wrote the famous Lorraine case that was sort of, it was like a litany of all the things you have to do to admit electronic evidence. And so this Sedona commentary is incredibly helpful for helping you deal with these issues. Let's go to the next slide. One thing that I wanted to make you aware of, two recent modifications to the federal rule amendments allow for the admission of evidence through authentication of evidence through using an affidavit. And Federal Rule of Evidence 902.13 has to do with reports that are generated from a system. So let's say you have a database that generates some pretty report. So you generate the pretty report. This allows you to get that report instead of producing the database or the data itself, getting that report in, admitting into court. And 14 is for, you know, digital records. These are the things that we're talking about now, text messages and other things. And let's go to the next slide. And these are the components necessary. And although these are in the federal rules, we were using these, you know, these techniques well before they were codified in the federal rules. And I would encourage you to use them in the states, even if your states do not have equivalent rules. But basically, you know, what does it take to get this admitted without Michael or Brad coming to court and spending a fortune because they sit in the hall and, you know, you're paying for them to be there. And instead, you know, they produce an affidavit which talks about their background and experience and why they're experts, and they talk about the process necessary, you know, to certify these and the sort of tools that they used either to create this report or to take a forensic copy or whatever best practice they used for getting this data, and the steps that were taken to preserve and their procedures, and then they give their opinion that this was a you know, is best evidence or a duplicate of the original data as it was found, the original text message. The original is as close to the original social media item as you can get because, you know, social media is it's very dynamic. It doesn't look anything at all when you break it down in its tidbits like what you see on the internet. And so it's very important when, you know, when you do this to have somebody authenticated in this fashion. So key takeaways before we get into questions. Look, I think Michael and Brad have already said, you know, best to get a forensics expert if you have doubts. You know, there are lots of pitfalls here. People can destroy the evidence and make it very difficult or modify the evidence. We've had cases where, you know, not only was the allegation that the IT persons changed it, but in fact, we've had cases where the IT person did in fact change it. So not pretty when you have to tell your client that something happened. So mobile forensics continues to expand. Look, we've talked all about these devices, and we've got new Supreme Court cases that say this device is just like your, you know, your nearest dearest computer. You got your lives on them, and, you know, from a privacy standpoint, it's very important. Virtual acquisition is here to stay. Look, we were already headed there. The last year and a half has changed things. The emergency situation, you know, it caused us to leap forward years in how we did things, and it's here to stay. Social media acquisition, complex, dynamic, constantly evolving. A lot of it depends. You know, we'll do the best we can. We'll try to work together to get at what's necessary, but you know, it's hard to work with, hard to present. Lastly, authenticating digital evidence is easy. I guess I got easy here. I guess I should have said is easy with the right resources. I've given you resources here. There's another slide that you'll get in your materials that's going to have even more resources than that. An article that was written by a law review article by Judge Paul Grimm, and a chart done by Kevin Brady and Judge Grimm that shows the pathway to authenticating and getting evidence, digital evidence admitted into court. Wonderful tools. They're all available. You can all search for them and find them free online and get educated that way as you prepare for presenting this evidence in court. So, Connie, that now I know we've got a bunch of questions here. I keep seeing them roll, so I know we don't have time to get through them all, but let's do the best we can.
Let's see what we can do. We have 5 minutes, and we'll start answering these. And you know, when we hit 2 o'clock, Elizabeth will put that CLE certification number up for you guys. So anybody that wants to drop off, you're more than welcome to do that. or you can, Elizabeth, you can do that whenever that's comfortable for you. But all of our contact information will be on the next to the last slide. So feel free to reach out to us with questions. If you need any help with anything, we'll be here for you. But we'll just start with question number 1, and we'll just try to fire them off and go through them as best we can. Question 1, turnaround time for cell phone data, text, and Snapchat, and how far back can you go? Okay, who's in the hot seat for this one?
It's going to be me.
Michael.
So, turnaround time completely depends on, people's schedules. How fast can we do the collection? Can we do it remotely? How fast can we get the data back? Our typical time spent on producing things like text messages or communications, I should say, from the different applications is usually, it takes us some time to process it and get it ready in the computer, and then some time to actually go through and validate what we're finding and what was processed with the vendor software. So usually we tell folks, a couple days, maybe a week tops. Can be faster if there's less data to cool down and whatnot. So we've done pretty quick turnarounds before in the past.
Okay. Good answer. Very succinct.
Well, the second part of the question was how far back can you get it? And this goes to it depends. We get what we get, and there are limitations to what we can get, and we try to get, we can get what's there and what's available, but all these applications work differently, and I would be comfortable saying, generally speaking, you're going to get the recent, several months worth of data, but when you go past 6 months or a year, depends on what kind of data it is, and it's hard to say, but it depends is the unfortunate answer, and we just got to go look.
Okay. On an iPhone, are your audio Siri searches saved somewhere? Brad, do you know the answer to that one?
Well, I know with Google, they do store those things. Like if you have the Google Home device, that's stored in the cloud. You can actually look that stuff up. I've not had, the opportunity to try to go pull that stuff, but I have to believe, since that's actually stored on the phone and it's in the Apple cloud, that should be stored somewhere on their side. Well, it might be stored somewhere on their side, but I certainly want to find that out. That's a good question.
Okay. Love these. These are awesome.
It's a really good question. I think that's one of those where we're going to go take a hard look at what kind of collection can we get. You get that deep dive collection that gets us a lot of data. There's a lot of stuff on these phones that are generally not available with your normal collection methods. So some phones can be broken into. And when I say broken, I don't mean like we do something the custodian's not aware of. But the fact is that some phones, we can get a deeper dive and get more information from the subsystem. And that is where some of those fun little artifacts are.
I'm going to guess, because my mother-in-law always said I was a great guesser. I'm going to guess, yeah, sure, it's saved in the cloud. That's how these programs learn. But I'm going to also say we can't get it. We can't get access to it in the cloud. So, but I think, of course, that's how these programs learn. It's saved somewhere.
Okay, here's another great one. Is Alexa activity recorded and saved somewhere? And is everything recorded and saved, or just when you are directing her?
I'm not sure about that one. I can say that I'm still kind of wired in and connected into some law enforcement, other forensic folks, and that's stuff that people like to play with. And what you find is kind of scary sometimes.
Yeah, same answer. I think it's in the cloud. Somebody has it. Law enforcement might be able to get access to it from Amazon. I doubt in civil cases you can get access to it, but I'll bet it's in the cloud somewhere, because that's how these tools learn. But whether or not you can get it once you put it there, I don't know. But I do know it's really weird. I talk about stuff in my household, and I search for things on Alexa, and I start getting ads on my website when I search. So, it's all connected. Something's going on.
It's built that way on purpose.
That it is. Okay, this is a great one. They're all great. Can data be recovered from a mobile device once the device has been completely erased? For example, the erase all content and settings on an iPhone.
If we can, but it's time to play the lottery. Once it's gone, the way that these devices are actually set up and the way that they store data. I'm going to try to really simplify this, but flash media, once these things get rolled over and they've wiped, it's near impossible to get data off of it. There are times when you can do recovery of some older phones with that encryption. It's called chip off. Take chip off, put in a device, and you read the memory and stuff. Sometimes you get lucky with that, find and delete stuff. But after a factory wipe, no.
Okay.
The best case we ever dealt with, fun case that we got where the spoliation occurred was we got the hard drive sent to us by somebody in the Russian mob with bullet holes through it. So that was their form of getting rid of the data, but it also was a message, I think.
Good luck. Oh,
Effective.
I told y'all we had some stories.
Yeah, we don't
I
want
wish
to
we
run
had
over.
time. Okay, I'm gonna keep going if it stays on, and just drop off as folks want to drop off. But these are good questions. And this is, give us two or three. What are the best programs to recover cell phone discovery? Either one of you guys, just what we use or what you prefer.
I'm not 100% sure what they meant by the discovery aspect, but when it comes to favorite tools, I think we should do my favorite tools, and we'll do Brad's favorite tools. So my favorite tools right now are Celebrate, and I'll follow that up with maybe some open source tools for gathering data.
But to put this into perspective, the Celebrate license costs $20,000, I think. Is that fair? Is that right? I just want to make
very,
sure
very, very expensive for civilians.
what we're talking about here.
I'd say that the tools we tend to use more often than not are Magnet, Axiom, Cloud, and the Celebrate. But I tend to like to use both of them in concert to get the richest data source, to get the most artifacts we can out of a phone. And certainly they both have the option of producing a load file. If you pay a little extra, there's always a little bit extra for these extras they would add on to these programs. But I like to use them both.
You got to be careful with, you're talking about forensic vendors too. It's the same way with training. Vendors love their tools, and vendors love to talk about the tools and what the tools can do. There's usually a lot of caveats associated with that. So you just have to be knowledgeable about what does and doesn't work in certain circumstances. There's a lot of folks, especially in the law enforcement community, who are writing their own tools to get the data that they can see it's there. Maybe it's in a database, or they're curious about it and they're going through and trying to find what new things can I find. So it's an interesting play, because the tools that you use may be some simple little open source tool that you can read and you can understand how it works and you can follow through with it, and you can get down the command line and get dirty. Or you could use some of these vendor tools that make some of the more repetitive tasks automated.
Okay.
So Connie, why don't we have one more, and I guess we'll have to do a follow up. Maybe we can respond to some of these questions another way, but why don't we have one more? And
yeah, let's see. Here's another one on cell phones. Can you take an image of a cell phone now and figure out what type of forensic analysis you want to do later? Another way of asking this is, are there different types of images of cell phones? Is there a magic phrase to use when you want a complete image? Very practical question.
That's actually a really good one. Yeah, so there's several different levels of forensic collection, especially with Celebrate. It really just depends on what you're looking for. If you're thinking that you're going to go back and you don't know exactly what you're looking for, getting the deepest dive is what you want.
And which version is that? What's the deepest dive? What do you call that?
Physical extraction, if you can get it. That's hard to do nowadays on cell phones. So advanced logicals, where you get the logical data, but you also get the file system data where that logical information is stored. There's basically a logical is asking your phone to give you the data. And a lot of times, like you ask the text messaging application, hey, can I see all the information in your database? And the text messaging application says, sure, I'll share with you, and dumps the data out. The other way is a file system where you're actually manipulating is the wrong word, grabbing the data and the databases and then examining those databases for the data that you're looking for. And sometimes you get lucky and you can find things that, the application is not going to show the typical user.
Okay, well, I think we're going to have to wind up because we're going to get shut down, and we don't want to leave anybody in the middle of an answer to a question. But we have these questions, and what we can do is try to put together a little Q&A to add to the slideshow presentation and answer these questions. Again, all of our contact information is provided within the slide. Reach out to us directly with anything that you have. We're here to help you. We want to be a resource for you. Again, education is very important to us, and we appreciate it, appreciate your time, and look forward hopefully to seeing you all again soon. Take care.